The freezing wind howled across the endless white expanse of Veridus 6, an ice-covered planet so hostile that even machines struggled to function. Snow swirled violently in the air, forming thick, blinding sheets that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Somewhere in the middle of this frozen wasteland, a group of humans trudged forward, their breath forming dense clouds in the bitter cold. Their suits were designed for extreme temperatures, but nothing could fully protect them from the relentless chill seeping into their bones. Professor Zyron, a towering alien figure with deep violet skin and piercing silver eyes, stood observing them from the safety of a heated observation dome. He was a scientist, a scholar of interstellar biology, and he had spent years studying human resilience. He had read reports of their adaptability, their ability to survive in the most unthinkable environments, but this was different. The ice planet was unforgiving, and he was certain that the humans would fail. "They can't last out there for long," Zyron muttered, adjusting his metallic exosuit to regulate his own body temperature. "Without an insulated structure, an igloo, at the very least, they'll succumb to the elements." Inside the dome, a group of alien researchers nodded in agreement. The data was clear: no species had ever survived the open terrain of Veridus 6 for more than a few hours. Even the most advanced life forms had either burrowed deep into the planet's surface or built reinforced shelters. Yet, these humans insisted on proving they could endure the impossible. On the icy ground, the leader of the expedition, Commander Ethan Voss, clenched his jaw against the bitter wind. He knew the odds. He had seen the calculations. But he also knew something the aliens didn't: humans had a way of pushing beyond logic, beyond what was considered possible. And they weren't going down without a fight. "Team, status check." Ethan shouted over the howling storm. His voice was rough, his body trembling, but his determination never wavered. One by one, his team responded. Dr. Tessa Monroe, their lead scientist, her voice tight from the cold, confirmed their oxygen levels were stable for now. Lieutenant Harris, their engineer, reported minor damage to his thermal regulator, but he could manage. The others checked in, each one barely holding on, but still moving. Still fighting. They had landed on Veridus 6 as part of an interstellar research project, an attempt to prove that humans could expand their reach even to the most extreme worlds. The alien scientists overseeing the test had made it clear they were expected to fail. The moment their body temperatures dropped too low, or their suits gave out, the experiment would be deemed conclusive. But Ethan didn't believe in failure. "Keep moving," he ordered. "We find shelter, or we make one." Tessa shot him a look. "Ethan, there is no shelter. There are no caves, no rock formations, nothing but ice. We should call for extraction before we cross the point of no return." Ethan exhaled sharply, considering their options. He looked at the sky, a swirling mass of dark gray and white, and then back toward the observation dome in the distance. They were being watched, analyzed like lab specimens. He knew what the aliens were thinking: that humans were just another species bound by limitations, that their resilience was overstated. But he also knew that humans had survived ice ages before. They had endured the impossible on Earth, on Mars, on moons with no breathable atmosphere. And this was just another challenge. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted something. A formation in the ice, a strange ridge barely visible beneath the snowfall. It wasn't much, but it was something. "There." Ethan pointed. "We dig." "Now." Harris hesitated. "Are you serious?" "There's nothing there but." "Then we make something." Ethan's voice was firm. "An igloo, a shelter, anything. If we stop moving, we die." The team knew he was right. There was no waiting for rescue. There was only survival. With numb fingers and exhausted limbs, they started cutting into the ice, shaping the blocks the way their ancestors once had. Their movements were slow, clumsy from the cold, but they refused to stop. Block by block, they built, pressing the ice together, forming a crude but functional dome. It wasn't perfect, but it was shelter. Inside the observation dome, Professor Zyron narrowed his eyes as the readings from the human team changed. Instead of dropping body temperatures and signs of failure, their vitals stabilized. The energy output from their suits decreased as their shelter insulated them from the worst of the cold. Zyron's fingers tightened around the edge of his console. "Impossible," he whispered. One of his assistants looked at him in confusion. "Professor, should we intervene? They might actually survive this." Zyron didn't respond immediately. He was watching the humans, watching how their teamwork and sheer willpower had created a solution where logic said there was none. Perhaps, he thought, he had underestimated them. Ethan sat inside the makeshift igloo, breathing in the slightly warmer air. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He glanced at his team, exhausted, shaking, but alive. He smirked and looked toward the sky, knowing the aliens were still watching. "I hope they're taking notes," he muttered. But just as the team started to believe they had a fighting chance, a deep, guttural sound rumbled beneath them. The ground trembled. Ice cracked. Tessa's eyes widened. "Ethan, tell me that's not what I think it is." The commander's expression darkened. This planet wasn't just cold, it was alive. And something beneath the ice had just woken up. The sound was deep, like the groan of a collapsing glacier, but it was coming from beneath them. Ethan felt the vibrations through the ice, subtle at first, then growing stronger. His breath caught as he glanced around at the others. Tessa had gone pale, her eyes darting to the floor of the igloo as the tremors pulsed again. Harris stiffened, his gloved hands tightening into fists. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the wind howling outside, a constant reminder of the deadly cold beyond their fragile shelter. Then the ground shuddered again, harder this time. A sharp crack split through the ice just outside the igloo, a jagged wound in the frozen surface. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Move. Now." The team scrambled, grabbing whatever gear they could. The igloo had barely been standing for an hour, but they couldn't afford to stay inside any longer. As they stepped out into the blizzard, the air felt even colder than before, or maybe it was just the fear creeping into their bones. Tessa stumbled slightly but caught herself. "Ethan, what the hell is under us?" "I don't know." He scanned the white landscape, searching for any sign of movement. "But I don't plan on waiting around to find out." Harris turned, his visor fogging slightly from his breath. "If something's down there, we could be standing on thin ice. One wrong step and—" Before he could finish, another deep groan reverberated through the ground, this time accompanied by a distant cracking sound. It was impossible to tell how far away it was. Could have been a mile. Could have been right beneath their feet. Professor Zyron watched from the observation dome, his elongated fingers tapping against his console. His eyes narrowed at the readings. The ground temperature was shifting, an anomaly that should have been impossible in this Six's frozen wasteland. Yet, something was causing internal heat fluctuations beneath the surface. He turned to his assistant. "Increase seismic scans. I want to know what's moving under that ice." The assistant hesitated. "Professor, should we extract the humans? If the ice collapses?" "No," Zyron said firmly. "This is beyond simple survival now. I need to see what they do next." Ethan and his team pressed forward, moving cautiously but quickly. The wind made it nearly impossible to see, and their visors could only adjust so much before the frost buildup blurred their vision. Tessa's voice crackled in Ethan's earpiece. "We need to find stable ground. If this whole area is breaking apart." A sudden, sharp sound cut through the storm. Not the wind. Not the ice. Something else. Ethan turned sharply. "Did anyone else hear that?" Harris nodded. "Yeah. And it wasn't just the ice cracking." Tessa swallowed hard. "It sounded hollow." Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. The ice planet had been deemed uninhabitable. No signs of life had ever been recorded here. But something wasn't right. The sound wasn't natural. It was deep, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. A few yards ahead, the ice had fractured into jagged, uneven shards. Ethan motioned for the others to stay back as he stepped forward carefully. He knelt, brushing away some of the snow, revealing a thin sheet of ice beneath. But beneath that ice, there was something dark. "Light," he said. Harris stepped forward and shined his wrist-mounted flashlight onto the spot. The beam penetrated the ice, revealing what looked like a cavern. A massive, gaping void beneath their feet. Tessa's breathing quickened. "Ethan, this isn't just a crack. This is a structure." Ethan stared down at the darkness below. The surface wasn't natural ice formations, it was smooth, almost metallic in some places. As if something had been buried here for a long, long time. Zyron leaned closer to his monitor, his silver eyes widening. No recorded scans ever showed this. The alien researchers around him whispered among themselves, uncertainty creeping into their usually confident tones. If the humans had discovered something, then it meant their understanding of Ver 6 was flawed. Ethan rose to his feet. "We need to move now. The ice is unstable." But before they could step back, another deep rumble shook the ground. This time, it wasn't distant. It was directly beneath them. The ice beneath Ethan's boots gave way. He barely had time to react before the ground collapsed, sending him plunging downward into the abyss. Tessa screamed his name, reaching out, but she was too late. The last thing Ethan saw before he disappeared into the darkness was the terror in his team's eyes. The fall was an instant. The tunnel of ice around him seemed endless, rushing past in a blur. Then, suddenly, impact. His body hit something solid, not ice but metal. His suit absorbed most of the force, but pain still shot through his ribs. He groaned, rolling onto his side. His head was spinning, but he was alive. Barely. He reached for his communicator, static filling his earpiece. "Tessa? Harris? Can you hear me?" No response. Just the low hum of interference. Ethan exhaled shakily and turned on his suit's flashlight. The beam illuminated his surroundings, and his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't in a natural cave. He was inside a massive, hollow structure buried beneath the ice. The walls, smooth and dark, were covered in markings, strange symbols that pulsed faintly, as if reacting to his presence. The ground beneath him was metallic, but ancient, corroded in places. This wasn't just ice. It was a ruin. And something in the darkness was moving. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, like the whisper of something shifting just beyond the reach of his light. Ethan's muscles tensed. He slowly rose to his feet, his breath shallow. He wasn't alone down here. Above the surface, Tessa and Harris stared in horror at the hole where Ethan had disappeared. The snowstorm raged around them, but neither moved. "We have to go after him," Tessa said, her voice shaking. Harris hesitated. "We don't even know how deep that goes. If we fall..." Tessa turned sharply. "I'm not leaving him down there." Inside the observation dome, Professor Zyron watched the feed, his fingers tight against his console. This had gone far beyond a survival experiment. The humans had found something buried beneath Ver 6. And now, something had found them. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The metallic floor beneath him was smooth in some places, fractured in others, like whatever this structure had once been had suffered centuries of decay. The symbols on the walls pulsed faintly, their dim glow flickering like dying embers. He swallowed hard. He wasn't supposed to be here. No one was. His gloved fingers traced one of the markings on the wall. It was cold, unnaturally so, even in a place like this. The moment his fingertips made contact, the pulse beneath the surface flickered brighter, almost as if the structure was reacting to him. A low, distant hum vibrated through the walls. Ethan froze. He wasn't alone. Something shifted in the darkness ahead. It wasn't loud. Just the soft scrape of movement, the kind that sent a chill up his spine. He slowly reached for his sidearm, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the shadows. A faint clicking sound echoed from somewhere beyond his line of sight. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the shifting of ice. It was deliberate. Rhythmic. Something was down here. Ethan took another step forward, his flashlight flickering slightly as he moved deeper into the ruins. His suit's temperature sensors fluctuated erratically, unable to decide if the air was freezing or strangely warm. He pressed a hand to his communicator again. "Tessa? Harris? Come in." More static. Above the surface, Tessa and Harris crouched near the edge of the collapsed ice, their suit lights barely penetrating the swirling snow. "We have to go after him," Tessa said again, her voice tight with urgency. Harris gritted his teeth. "We don't even know how far down he fell. If we just jump, we might end up stranded too." Tessa adjusted her wrist display, pulling up the scanner. "There's a cavern system underneath us. I can see weak heat signatures, but the interference is scrambling most of the readings. That means he's still alive." Harris exhaled sharply, glancing back at the observation dome in the distance. "You really think they're gonna send a rescue for us?" Tessa didn't answer. She already knew the truth. The aliens were watching, observing, but they weren't going to help. This had stopped being an experiment. They were on their own. Harris sighed. "Fine. But if I break my legs, I'm blaming you." Tessa managed a weak smile. "Noted." They set up their gear quickly, securing a tether to the strongest ice formation nearby. One by one, they descended into the dark abyss below. Professor Zyron stood motionless, watching the readings shift on his monitor. His team of researchers whispered behind him, their expressions uneasy. "This isn't what we predicted," one of them muttered. Zyron didn't respond immediately. His silver eyes remained locked on the screen, on the humans, on the anomaly beneath the ice. Something had been buried on this planet for thousands of years. And now, because of the humans, it was awake. Deep in the ruins, Ethan moved cautiously, his grip firm on his weapon. The flickering symbols along the walls pulsed in irregular patterns, as if responding to his presence. He had no idea what they meant, but they felt old. Not just old. Ancient. The clicking sound came again. Closer this time. Ethan's fingers tightened around his weapon. His breath came out slow and controlled, his body tense. He moved forward, step by step, until the flashlight beam caught something ahead. He stopped breathing. The figure stood just at the edge of the darkness. Tall. Unmoving. Its form barely visible beneath the dim, shifting glow of the walls. Ethan's mind raced. Was it a statue? A machine? Something else? Then, without warning, the figure moved. Not a step. Not a shift. It uncoiled. The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. The thing had been crouched. Waiting. He took a slow step back. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he held his ground. The figure tilted its head, the faint light reflecting off what looked like a smooth, metallic surface. It made no sound, but the air around Ethan grew heavier, colder. Then it spoke. Not in words. Not in any language he could understand. The sound was inside his head, a deep vibration, an alien whisper scraping against the edges of his thoughts. Ethan clenched his jaw. His vision blurred for half a second before he forced himself to focus. "Who are you?" No response. The figure took one slow, deliberate step forward. Ethan raised his weapon. "Stop." It didn't. Then, without warning, the entire room trembled. The walls shuddered, the symbols flashing erratically. Ethan staggered as the ground beneath him vibrated. The figure didn't react. It simply stood there, watching. Then Ethan heard it. A voice, Tessa's voice. "Ethan! Ethan, do you copy?" His eyes widened. He pressed his communicator. "Tessa! I'm here." "Where are you?" "We're coming down. Harris and I." A sharp, ear-piercing screech erupted through the chamber. Ethan flinched, his head pounding from the sudden noise. It wasn't coming from Tessa's transmission. It was coming from inside the ruins. The figure jerked its head toward the ceiling. Ethan followed its gaze. Above him, the ice groaned. The ceiling cracked. And then, just as Tessa and Harris dropped into the cavern, the entire structure shifted. The ruins weren't just a tomb. They were waking up. And something else. Something much bigger was stirring in the depths below. Ethan barely had time to react before the ground beneath him lurched. The walls trembled violently, sending cracks rippling through the ancient structure. The pulsing symbols flared erratically, flickering between dim light and total darkness. The air grew thick with something unnatural, something alive. Tessa and Harris landed hard on the metallic floor, their descent rougher than expected. Tessa gritted her teeth as she pushed herself up, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Ethan!" Her voice was frantic as she scanned the chamber. Ethan turned toward them, but before he could move, the figure in the shadows twitched. It was no longer still. Its head snapped toward Tessa and Harris, as if it had just now noticed their presence. Then it began to move. Not walking. Not running. Gliding. Its form shifted with unnatural precision, its limbs unfolding in a way that made Ethan's stomach turn. The faint clicking sound returned, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the pulsing lights around them. Ethan's grip on his weapon tightened. "Tessa, Harris, get back." Tessa barely had time to react before the figure was in front of them. Up close, it was even more unsettling. Its form was humanoid but wrong, its surface smooth like metal but shifting like something alive beneath the shell. It loomed over them, unmoving. Watching. Harris took an instinctive step back. "Ethan, what the hell is that?" "I don't know." Ethan's voice was low, controlled. "But don't move." The creature's head tilted slightly, as if analyzing them. Then, for the first time, it spoke. Not in words. Not in any language they could understand. The sound was deep, vibrating in their skulls, a sensation more than a voice. Images flashed in Ethan's mind, fractured, chaotic. Ice breaking. Shadows shifting. And then something deeper, something vast and ancient waking beneath them. Ethan winced, gripping his head as the pressure grew unbearable. Tessa let out a sharp breath, staggering. Harris cursed, his hands clutching his helmet as if trying to block out the noise. The ruins shuddered again. Then the ice above them cracked. A massive fissure split open in the ceiling, and through it, they saw the storm raging outside. Snow and debris fell in bursts, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted even further. The thing in front of them didn't react to the cold. It simply turned its head toward the opening, and then, without warning, it moved. Not away. Not toward them. Down. The ground beneath the creature opened up, a dark chasm splitting the floor. The pulsing symbols flickered violently as the structure itself seemed to shift, almost as if something was controlling it. The creature descended into the darkness below, disappearing into the void without a sound. Ethan exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. "We need to move. Now." Tessa barely had time to nod before the ground beneath them started to crack. Harris swore. "We're standing on a damn trapdoor." The symbols along the walls pulsed one final time. Then the floor beneath them collapsed. They plunged downward, their screams lost in the void. The fall lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The air rushed past them, freezing and sharp, before they hit something, not solid ground, but a surface that caught them. It wasn't ice. It wasn't metal. It was something else. Ethan gasped as his body made impact. The surface beneath him pulsed, like a slow, massive heartbeat. It wasn't stone. It wasn't artificial. It was alive. Tessa groaned beside him, trying to push herself up. Harris coughed, his breath fogging in the frigid air. They weren't in a cavern anymore. They were in something deeper. Something older. Ethan forced himself to his feet, his flashlight beam sweeping across the chamber. It was massive, too massive. The walls weren't made of rock but of something organic, something shifting ever so slightly with every passing second. Then he saw them. Figures. Lining the walls. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Frozen. They weren't human. They weren't alien, not like Zyron and his people. These figures were different, trapped within the strange, shifting surface of the walls. Their bodies were encased in something transparent, their features locked in expressions of fear. Tessa sucked in a breath. Oh my God. Harris took an uneasy step forward. Are they dead? Ethan wasn't sure how to answer. They looked dead. But something about the way the walls pulsed made it feel like they were waiting. Then, behind them, something moved. A deep, guttural sound reverberated through the chamber. Not the clicking from before. Something else. Something waking up. The air grew heavy. The pulsing in the walls quickened. Then, from the darkness beyond the frozen figures, something stirred. A shape. Huge. It was rising. Ethan took a step back, his entire body screaming at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ground beneath them trembled as the massive form unfurled, its presence suffocating, overwhelming. Tessa clutched Ethan's arm, her voice barely a whisper. What did we wake up? The answer came in the form of a sound, low and deep, like a voice from the depths of the planet itself. It wasn't words, but it carried meaning. A warning. A promise. A name. Ethan didn't understand the language, but somehow, he felt it. And he knew, whatever this thing was, whatever had been sleeping beneath the ice for untold centuries. It was awake now. And it was looking right at them. The chamber pulsed with a slow, heavy rhythm, like the heartbeat of something enormous. The walls shifted in a way that made Ethan's stomach churn, not from movement, but from the realization that they weren't inside a structure at all. They were inside something alive. The frozen figures lining the walls remained motionless, their faces locked in silent terror. But the thing that had awakened in the darkness was different. It was moving, stretching, its massive form rising like something shaking off the weight of centuries. Ethan felt his breath catch as it unfurled. It wasn't entirely visible yet, only glimpses between the shifting walls and the flickering light of his flashlight, an enormous shape, limbs or tendrils curling and unfolding, something vast and ancient. Its presence filled the space, pressing against them, making the air feel too thick to breathe. Tessa's grip on his arm tightened. Ethan, she whispered, barely audible. We have to move. Harris had his weapon drawn, but his hands were shaking. Where? There's no way out. Ethan's mind raced. He scanned the chamber, looking for anything, an exit, a weakness, something that could give them even a chance of survival. But before he could act, the deep vibration returned, the same voice-like hum that had spoken in his mind before. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a question. A single pulse of meaning. A demand. Why are you here? Ethan stiffened. The sensation wasn't just a sound, it was inside him, rattling his bones, pressing into his thoughts. It wasn't just talking. It was searching. Tessa flinched, her hands flying to her head as if trying to block something out. Harris gritted his teeth, his body shaking under the weight of the presence invading their minds. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to focus. He didn't know how, but somehow, the thing was reading them. Learning them. And then, without warning, the frozen figures in the walls moved. One by one, their eyes snapped open. Tessa gasped and stumbled back, her flashlight beam sweeping over their faces. The once lifeless bodies inside the transparent material were suddenly awake. Their eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie light that pulsed through the chamber. Then, almost in unison, they turned their heads toward Ethan. His pulse hammered. They weren't random prisoners. They weren't just victims. They were watching him. And then one of them spoke. The voice was distorted, layered, like a chorus of whispers overlapping. The words didn't come from its mouth, but from everywhere, echoing through the chamber. You were not meant to find this place. Ethan's mouth was dry. He could feel Tessa trembling beside him. Harris took another step back, his finger hovering over the trigger of his weapon. The massive entity above them shifted again, its presence pressing down on them like gravity itself. The figures in the walls remained still, their glowing eyes locked onto Ethan, as if waiting for him to answer. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no idea what to say. We didn't mean to come here," he forced out, his voice unsteady. "We fell. The ice. Lies." The words slammed into his skull like a shockwave. Ethan stumbled, his head pounding, his thoughts scattering. Harris cursed. "Ethan, what the hell is happening?" Ethan barely heard him. His vision blurred, the chamber around him twisting like a mirage. The presence inside his mind was no longer just searching. It was digging. Memories flashed before him, his arrival on the planet, the alien professor's warnings, the moment he and his team had stepped onto the ice. The storm. The collapse. But then, something else. A memory that wasn't his own. A war. Flashes of light, weapons unlike anything he'd ever seen. A battle beneath the ice, not between humans, but between them. The frozen ones. The towering presence looming over them now. They weren't just ancient. They were survivors. Ethan gasped as the vision faded, leaving him cold and shaken. The truth settled over him like a crushing weight. This place, it wasn't a ruin. It wasn't a tomb. It was a prison. And whatever had been sealed away here was never supposed to wake up. Tessa grabbed his arm. "Ethan! Talk to me." He turned to her, his breath uneven. "We have to get out of here." Harris scoffed. "No kidding. But how?" Before Ethan could answer, a deep, rumbling sound filled the chamber. The walls trembled, the frozen figures tensed, and the entity above them. It moved. Not just shifting. Rising. The pulsing lights around them flickered wildly as the massive form fully emerged, revealing its shape for the first time. It wasn't like the frozen ones. It wasn't humanoid at all. It was something else. Something worse. A dark, towering silhouette, covered in shifting, flowing patterns, its form impossible to fully comprehend. It had no eyes, no mouth, but Ethan felt it staring at him. The chamber shook violently. Cracks splintered through the walls. And then, as the air turned thick with an overwhelming, suffocating presence, Ethan realized something horrifying. This wasn't just a prison. It was a battlefield. And they were standing at the center of a war that had been waiting for someone, anyone, to set it loose again. The ground beneath them gave a final, thunderous shudder. And then, the ice collapsed. Darkness swallowed them whole. Darkness swallowed them. The roar of collapsing ice echoed all around, a deafening sound that drowned out everything else. Ethan felt himself falling, weightless, spinning through the cold void. The others were somewhere nearby, but he couldn't see them. The only thing he could feel was the biting chill and the overwhelming pressure in his chest, like something was squeezing the air out of his lungs. Then, impact. Ethan slammed into something hard, the shock jolting through his body. For a second, he couldn't move. His limbs were numb, his vision blurred. He gasped, sucking in the freezing air, and forced himself to focus. The world around him was dimly lit, the same eerie glow pulsing through the walls. The ice was shifting, breaking apart, revealing what had been buried beneath it for centuries. A battlefield. The massive entity, the ancient being that had been locked away, was fully awake now. Its towering form loomed over the ruins, shifting and pulsing with an unnatural energy. It wasn't just breaking free. It was absorbing the frozen figures trapped in the walls. One by one, they melted into it, their forms dissolving as if they had never existed. Ethan's pulse hammered. He turned his head and saw Tessa a few feet away, struggling to push herself up. Harris was on his knees, gripping his rifle, his eyes wide with terror. They had survived the fall, but they weren't safe. The ground trembled violently as the ancient being stretched its form, the patterns on its surface shifting like liquid shadows. It wasn't just escaping. It was becoming something else. Tessa clutched Ethan's arm. "We need to stop it." Ethan's mind raced. How? The thing was beyond anything they had ever encountered. Weapons wouldn't work. Running wasn't an option. The ice storm above was raging, and the ruins were collapsing around them. Then the voice returned. Not from the entity. From somewhere else. A whisper in his mind. A choice must be made. Ethan stiffened. It wasn't the same overwhelming force that had invaded his thoughts before. This was different. It was coming from the ruins themselves. He looked down. The ice beneath them was fracturing, revealing something hidden deep below, a massive structure, pulsing with ancient energy. Symbols flickered along its surface, the same ones that had lined the walls before. This wasn't just a prison. It was a containment system, a failsafe. And it was still active. Ethan's breath caught. He understood now. The alien professor had been right, humans couldn't survive this planet without an igloo, but not for the reasons they had assumed. The cold wasn't just dangerous. It was a weapon. The ice had been sealing this entity away, keeping it from escaping. And now, they had broken the seal. Ethan turned to Tessa and Harris. "We have to reactivate the containment system." Harris shook his head. "How? This thing is ancient. We don't even know how it works." Ethan didn't have an answer, but he didn't need one. The ruins were speaking to him. The choice had to be made. The massive entity turned toward them, sensing their realization. The ground beneath them cracked as it advanced, its form shifting, stretching, growing stronger with every passing second. It was going to escape. And if it did, there would be no stopping it. Ethan didn't think. He moved. He sprinted toward the shattered ice, toward the glowing symbols beneath them. The moment his hands touched the surface, a surge of energy coursed through him. The symbols flared to life, responding to his presence. The entity let out a deep, guttural sound, a sound of recognition. It knew what he was doing. And it was afraid. The walls trembled violently. The ice storm above intensified, the wind howling as if the planet itself was reacting. The ruins shifted, the ancient mechanism deep within them coming back to life. Tessa and Harris backed away as the ground split apart, revealing massive crystalline structures beneath them. Energy pulsed through them, spreading like veins of frozen lightning. The containment system was reactivating, pulling the cold back toward the center, toward the entity. The ancient being let out a final, deafening roar as the ice surged upward, wrapping around it like chains. Its form twisted, resisting, but the containment system was stronger. The ruins weren't just built to hold it. They were built to consume it. The ice rose higher, solidifying around the entity, freezing it once again. The pulsing energy flickered, dimmed, and then silence. The chamber was still. The ruins had done their job. Ethan staggered back, his breath visible in the freezing air. The storm outside was dying down. The containment system had worked. They had won. Tessa let out a shaky breath. "Is it over?" Harris stared at the frozen mass where the entity had stood. "I don't know." Ethan didn't answer. He turned back to the symbols, the ones that had spoken to him. The ones that had given him the choice. And that's when he saw it. One of the frozen figures, the ones that had been absorbed, wasn't fully gone. It was still visible, trapped in the ice, its eyes locked on Ethan. It wasn't afraid. It was smiling. Ethan's stomach dropped. The containment system had sealed the entity away again. But something was wrong. Because something else had been waiting beneath the ice. And now, it was awake. The ruins trembled one last time. Then, darkness. The silence stretched across the frozen chamber, thick and heavy. Ethan's breath came in slow, uneven gasps as he stared at the frozen figure trapped beneath the ice. The smile on its face sent a cold shiver down his spine. The containment system had done its job, it had sealed the ancient entity away again. But something was wrong. Something had changed. Tessa took a cautious step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, what is that?" Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know." Harris stood frozen in place, his hands clenched into fists. The adrenaline that had kept them moving before was fading, replaced by an eerie sense of unease. The battle was over, but the ruins still hummed with a quiet energy. The ice had done more than just seal the entity, it had absorbed it, trapped it completely. But the frozen figure, the one smiling from beneath the surface, wasn't part of the entity. It was something else. A survivor? A remnant of whatever war had been fought here. Or worse, something that had been waiting all along? The storm outside had died down, and the air inside the chamber was growing colder by the second. Ethan's fingers felt numb, his body trembling from exhaustion and the biting chill. They needed to leave. Tessa exhaled sharply and turned to Ethan. "Can we even get out of here?" Ethan scanned the chamber. The collapse had sealed off most of the tunnels, but a single path remained open, leading upward toward the icy cavern where they had fallen. The exit. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their only way out. Harris let out a hollow laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. "After everything we just went through, climbing out of here might be the least insane thing we've done." Ethan nodded. "Let's move before the cold gets worse." They made their way toward the exit, careful to avoid the unstable ice. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion dragging at their limbs. The climb was slow and grueling, but inch by inch, they made progress. As they reached the upper cavern, the world beyond was eerily still. The storm had finally settled, leaving behind a landscape of pure, untouched white. Their ship was still intact in the distance, its lights barely visible through the frost-covered air. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They had survived. Tessa turned to Ethan. "Are we going to tell them?" Ethan hesitated. The research team waiting for them at the base camp, the alien professor who had warned them about the dangers of this world, what were they supposed to say? That they had nearly unleashed an ancient force beyond comprehension? That the ice wasn't just a natural barrier but a containment field holding something terrifying beneath its surface? Harris gave a tired chuckle. "Yeah, sure. Let's tell them we accidentally woke up some kind of frozen god and almost ended the world. That'll go over real well." Ethan exhaled. "We tell them what they need to know. That we found ruins. That it was dangerous. That we sealed it back up." He glanced back at the ice-covered cavern behind them. "And that no one, should ever go back down there." Tessa and Harris exchanged glances but didn't argue. Some things were better left buried. They reached the ship in silence. The warmth inside was jarring after so much time in the cold, and the feeling returned to their limbs in painful waves. The control panel flickered as Ethan powered up the systems. The communications link crackled, and the voice of the research team came through, thick with concern. "Ethan, Tessa, Harris, do you copy? What happened out there?" Ethan exchanged a look with Tessa, then pressed the comms button. "We're alive," he said. "We're coming back." The relief in the voice on the other end was immediate. "Thank God. We lost contact with you during the storm. We thought," a pause. "Did you find anything?" Ethan's fingers hovered over the controls. His mind flashed back to the ruins, to the massive entity, to the frozen figure smiling beneath the ice. He chose his words carefully. "We found evidence of something ancient. Something dangerous. The ice was keeping it contained. We made sure it stayed that way." Silence on the other end. Then, finally, a quiet reply. "Understood." Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaustion finally settling over him like a heavy weight. Tessa stared out the window at the frozen wasteland beyond, her expression unreadable. Harris let out a deep sigh, rubbing his eyes. No one said it, but they all knew the truth. The planet wasn't just cold, it was designed to be cold. The ice wasn't just ice. It was a prison, a warning, a barrier against something that should never be let out. And for now, at least, it was holding. As the ship lifted off, leaving the frozen world behind, Ethan allowed himself to believe, for just a moment, that the nightmare was over. That they had done what needed to be done. But deep in the ruins, beneath the endless ice, the frozen figure remained. And its smile never faded,